Captain Willi Bratge, commander of the Bridge Security Detachment at Remagen, told the American military newspaper Stars and Stripes in March 1962, "I asked for 600 kilograms of Army explosives. I received 300 kilograms of commercial explosive. It was not an excuse. It was an inventory. A dying Army's arithmetic," recited 17 years later by the one officer whose entire job, on the 7th of March 1945, had been to make sure a 900-foot steel bridge across the Rhine never fell into American hands. He failed. That failure does not appear in the films that shaped how this war is remembered. It barely survives in the textbooks. Here is the question sitting underneath it. How does an army retreating on every front, under a standing order from Berlin to destroy every bridge behind it, leave the very last one standing over Germany's own river? And how does the answer end, within the week, with 4 of that army's own officers dead in front of a firing squad, shot by their own side for the crime of failing? We are going to walk through both. By March 1945, the German army in the West is not fighting a war so much as postponing a verdict. The Ardennes offensive burned out in January. The Rhineland campaign burned through what was left. Divisions on paper are battalions in the field. Battalions are companies. The men who remain are old men pulled from the Volkssturm Home Guard, boys of 15 and 16 from the Hitler Youth flak batteries, and stragglers who have walked out of a dozen broken units and attached themselves to whatever officer still gives orders that make sense. Remagen is a market town on the Rhine's west bank, a few miles south of Bonn, the kind of place war reaches by accident rather than design. Its bridge is not new. Built between 1916 and 1919 by Russian prisoners of war, it was raised to move German troops and shells toward the trenches of the First War, and named for General Erich Ludendorff. Twin rail tracks run its length, flanked by wooden footpaths for infantry. At each end, stone towers rise from the black basalt of the riverbank, built to house machine guns and flak crews. On the east bank, the bridge feeds directly into a tunnel bored through the Erpeler Ley, a cliff nearly 700 feet high. The Rhine is the last natural barrier standing between the Western Allies and the industrial heartland of Germany. Every other crossing between the Dutch border and Switzerland has already been blown, dropped into the river by German engineers under standing orders from Berlin the moment retreating troops clear each span. Whichever army holds an intact bridge over this river, even for a single day, holds the fastest road into a country that has spent 5 months losing every other kind of ground it had left. By the first week of March, the German 15th Army is pouring across that bridge in the other direction. Columns of trucks, horse-drawn guns, walking wounded, refugees with handcarts. It is the last crossing left standing on this stretch of the river, and everyone on the German side knows it is scheduled to die the moment the last unit clears it. Responsible for making sure it does is Captain Willi Bratge, an engineer officer with a security garrison too thin and too tired to matter much either way. On the morning of the 7th, he is joined, and effectively superseded, by Major Hans Scheller, adjutant to the corps commander, sent forward to take personal charge of the demolition. Scheller is not a demolition specialist. He is a staff officer following an order down a chain that no longer functions the way it did in 1940. The technical work belongs to Captain Karl Timmermann, the engineer who will have to close the firing circuit by hand if the primary system fails. On the American side, 3 men matter most. Brigadier General William Hoge commands Combat Command B of the 9th Armored Division, and his orders that morning say nothing about capturing a bridge. They say to reach the Rhine and screen the flank. 2nd Lieutenant Karl Timmermann commands Company A of the 27th Armored Infantry Battalion, and this is his first day in that job. His predecessor was hit the day before, outside the town of Meckenheim. Timmermann was born in Frankfurt in 1922, the son of an American occupation soldier and a German mother, raised afterward in West Point, Nebraska. He is about to lead armed Americans into the country of his own birth. And Sergeant Alexander Drabik, 34 years old, older than most of the men around him, a rifle sergeant with no illusions left about what infantry work costs. None of these 3 has any reason to expect the bridge will still be standing when they reach it. The advance that morning is not aimed at Remagen specifically. Major General John Milliken, commanding 3 Corps, tells the 9th Armored's commander, Major General John Leonard, to push toward the river and see what is there. His instruction, relayed down the chain on the 6th of March, is blunt. You see that black line on the map. If you seize that, your name will go down in history. Nobody expects the line on the map to still exist by the time anyone reaches it. Early in the afternoon of March 7th, a reconnaissance element of Task Force Engemann crests the high ground above Remagen and looks down into the valley. Through the smoke of a retreating army, the bridge is there, intact. Traffic still crossing it. Hoge has minutes, not hours, to decide. Doctrine says a target this obvious, this valuable, will be gone before anyone reaches it, blown the instant the Germans see American armor on the ridge. Ordering men across it anyway, against a demolition charge that could fire at any second, is not what the orders call for. Hoge decides anyway. Years afterward, he explained it in one sentence. I felt inside me that I could never live with the knowledge that I had given up that opportunity without making a try. American tanks roll onto the high ground and open fire on the flak towers guarding the bridgeheads. Under that covering fire, Timmermann leads Company A down the slope on foot, toward the western tower, toward the bridge deck, toward whatever is wired beneath it. On the German side, the countdown is already running. Bratge and Friesenhahn watch the Americans come down off the ridge and give the order to fire the demolition circuit. Nothing happens. An artillery round, hours or minutes earlier, has already severed the main firing cable where it runs through a conduit near the eastern pier. Friesenhahn has one option left, a backup primer cord, lit by hand. It works, partly. Shortly before 4 in the afternoon, the charge detonates. Smoke, then a thrown wave of stone dust and splinters rolling down the length of the span. A 30-foot gap tears open in the wooden catwalk on the southern side. The steel truss beneath groans, drops, and holds. That is the whole of it. One charge fires. The rest, a further 160 kilograms, stacked on the piers. A 230-kilogram block whose blasting cap misfires. 640 kilograms more, sitting in the flooded wells inside the piers themselves. Never goes off. 300 kilograms of weak industrial explosive, ordered as a substitute for 600 kilograms of military-grade charge that never arrived, cannot bring down a structure built to carry locomotives. Drabik does not wait to find out if the rest will fire. He and his squad move first, running down the center of the span. Through smoke still hanging over the gap, the first charge tore open. We ran down the middle of the bridge, shouting as we went, he said later. I didn't stop because I knew that if I kept moving they couldn't hit me. He is the first American soldier across the Rhine on foot. Timmermann follows within minutes, the first officer. Behind them, a squad of combat engineers under Lieutenant Hugh Mott goes to work with wire cutters on what remains of the demolition system, tracing cable by hand along the girders, severing every lead they can find before anyone on the German side gets a second chance to close the circuit manually. It is slow, exposed, unglamorous work, done while men are still firing from the tunnel mouth on the far bank. It is also, in the balance of the whole afternoon, as important as the sprint across the deck. 4 German officers will answer for what happened on this bridge with their lives inside the week. We will come back to them. By nightfall on the 7th, a reinforced company holds a shallow perimeter on the east bank, dug in at the base of the cliff, with hundreds of German soldiers and civilian refugees still sheltering, disarmed and disoriented, inside the tunnel above them. Engineers judge the damaged structure can bear vehicles if spaced and centered carefully. Lieutenant John Grimball's tank platoon crosses first, 1 Sherman at a time, engines idling low, drivers hugging the center line while the wounded truss creaks under each pass. Inside the tunnel above the American perimeter, the darkness holds more people than either side yet realizes. Soldiers who drop their rifles rather than die for a bridge already lost, and civilians with nowhere else to run when the fighting reached their town. Nobody comes out until morning. Nobody inside yet knows whose army has won the day. Word travels up the chain that night. General Omar Bradley, when a staff officer at Eisenhower's headquarters tells him the Remagen crossing is poorly positioned for the existing plan and orders him to hold rather than exploit it, answers with a question rather than an apology. What the hell do you want us to do? Pull back and blow it up? Eisenhower, hearing the exchange secondhand, is reported to have laughed it off with a line about Bradley apologizing for having a bridge across the Rhine at all. Within days, 5 divisions originally slated to converge on Cologne are redirected toward Remagen instead. For the German High Command, the reaction is closer to disbelief than strategy. Word does not reach Field Marshal Walter Model's headquarters cleanly or quickly. When it does, the response is fury without a plan to match it. Adolf Hitler, informed that the last bridge on the Middle Rhine has fallen intact, treats it as a personal betrayal by the officers responsible, and orders it destroyed by any means available, whatever the cost of doing so this late. What follows over the next 10 days is not one attack but 5, each different in kind, each failing in a different way. The first is immediate. Scattered German infantry and what remains of a nearby Volksgrenadier division try to push the bridgehead back into the river within the first 48 hours. They do not have the numbers left to do it, and the perimeter holds. The second is artillery, and it does not stop. German gunners bring a railway gun into range, along with a 600mm Karl Goretz super heavy mortar, a weapon designed to crack reinforced fortifications, not a river crossing choked with foot traffic. Floating mines are released upstream to drift down against the piers. American engineers stretch cable booms across the current and post riflemen along both banks around the clock to detonate anything that floats too close before it reaches the structure. The third is the Luftwaffe, and it is the largest sustained German air effort of the closing months of the war. Over the following 10 days, German records count 367 individual sorties flown against the bridge and the crossing sites around it, including some of the first jet-powered Arado bombers committed to combat. The Americans respond by massing the heaviest concentration of anti-aircraft artillery fielded anywhere in the war to that point, a barrage so continuous that men who lived through it called it the greatest anti-aircraft battle in American military history. American gun crews claim close to a third of every raid shot down. The bridge stands. The air campaign fails. Here is where the four officers come back into it. On Hitler's direct order, a general named Rudolf Hübner is appointed to head what the paperwork calls the Flying Special Court-Martial West, and given authority that bypasses the normal machinery of German military law entirely. He has no legal training. He does not need any. He acts as prosecutor and judge in the same sitting. Within days of the bridge's fall, Major Hans Scheller, the staff officer sent forward that morning to take personal charge of the demolition, along with Major Herbert Strobel, Major August Kraft, and Lieutenant Karl Heinz Peters, are tried, convicted, and taken into the nearby woods. They are shot in the back of the neck and buried where they fall. Letters written to their families in the hours before the executions are collected and burned rather than sent. A fifth officer, Captain Willi Bratge, is sentenced to death in the same proceeding. He is spared only because he is, by then already an American prisoner, beyond the reach of a firing squad that answers to Berlin. Not a single one of these men chose to leave the bridge standing. Bratge asked for explosives he never received. Scheller inherited a circuit already cut by artillery fire before he arrived. It did not matter. Someone had to answer for it, and Hitler had already decided who. The fourth wave, 7 days after the crossing, is unlike anything used against a single bridge before or since. Hitler orders SS General Hans Kammler to fire V-2 rockets, weapons built to terrorize cities from hundreds of miles away, directly at the crossing itself. 11 missiles are launched on the 14th of March. It is the only time in the war V-2s are used against a tactical target, and the only time they are fired at a location inside what was still, nominally, German-held ground. The closest strike lands within 300 meters of the span. 6 American soldiers are killed. German civilians in the villages around Remagen, hit by rockets meant for the Americans, die in the same barrage. The bridge itself is untouched. The fifth wave is the strangest. In the crossing's final days, 7 German Navy combat swimmers, equipped with Italian-made underwater breathing sets, slip into the freezing Rhine upstream to plant demolition charges on the piers by hand. The Americans, forewarned or simply cautious, deploy canal defense lights along the riverbank for the first time in combat. A secret, powerful searchlight system built originally for armored night operations, never before used this way. Under that light, the water offers nowhere to hide. All 7 swimmers are killed or captured before a single charge is set. 5 waves. Infantry, artillery, aircraft, ballistic rockets, combat swimmers. None of it brings the bridge down. Gravity does. 10 days. 10 days of bombs, shell fragments, the original blast damage, and the unbroken weight of tanks, trucks, and marching men, crossing at a rate the structure was never built to carry. March 17th, 3 in the afternoon. Engineers are still on the span, working, reinforcing steel that has taken more punishment than any bridge on the Rhine has ever absorbed. No warning. A groan. Then a lurch felt through the boots of every man standing on the deck. The center span drops into the river. Men fall with it. Some jump. Some cling to twisted steel as it goes under. Officers on the bank are shouting names into a river running high and cold with March meltwater. Below, in Remagen itself, the same 10 days wear down a town of some 5,000 residents. Cellars serve as bomb shelters. Windows have been blown out for a week. Families ration whatever food the retreating army did not requisition on its way through. None of them chose this fight. The bridge decided it for them, the way it decided everything else that March. Records differ on exactly how many engineers died that afternoon. Some counts say 28, others 33. But every account agrees on the number wounded: 63. The 276th Engineer Combat Battalion alone loses 6 men outright, with 11 more missing and roughly 60 injured. The 158th Engineer Port Construction and Repair Group loses 8 more. No German shell causes this. No demolition charge, no rocket, no swimmer. The Ludendorff Bridge survives everything the Wehrmacht throws at it and dies of exhaustion, under the weight of the army it had just delivered across the Rhine. By then it barely matters, and that is its own kind of ending. Engineers had already thrown a treadway bridge, a pontoon bridge, and a Bailey bridge across the river alongside it, redundant crossings built in anticipation of exactly this outcome. When the Ludendorff finally goes down, traffic barely slows. Within a week of the original crossing, 7 American divisions are established on the east bank. By March 25th, more than 125,000 troops, 6 divisions with their armor and artillery, have poured through the bridgehead, a crossing achieved roughly 3 weeks ahead of Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery's carefully planned set-piece assault farther north. Total American casualties across the 18 days of fighting around Remagen run past 900, by First Army's own count. German losses were never fully tallied. The units that might have counted them were themselves being dissolved, absorbed, or simply ceasing to exist as organized formations within days of the crossing. There is no victory parade in the sources that survive. No champagne, no speeches, just tired men reinforcing a perimeter, and combat engineers going straight from mourning their own dead into building the next bridge. On March 10th, 3 days after the crossing, Hitler removed Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt from command of the entire Western Front. Historians tie the timing directly to the collapse unfolding along the Rhine, Remagen chief among its causes. Not celebration, just consequence, moving through the chain of command like current through a wire. What became of the men who were there? Karl Timmermann received the Distinguished Service Cross for the day he led Company A across. He stayed in uniform after the war, and when the next one came, he went with it, landing at Incheon with the 7th Infantry Division in September 1950. Sick call in Korea turned up a malignant tumor. He died at Fitzsimmons Army Hospital in Denver on October 21, 1951, at 29 years old, and was buried with full military honors at Fort Logan National Cemetery in Colorado. The town that raised him took years to fully claim him as its own. Alexander Drabik went home to Toledo, Ohio, and spent the rest of his working life as a butcher. He received his Distinguished Service Cross that August, presented in person by Major General Leonard. On September 28, 1993, driving to a reunion of his old unit, his car collided with a tractor-trailer on Interstate 70 near Columbia, Missouri. He was 83. His wife, Marguerite, riding beside him, died in the same crash. Willi Bratge survived the war as an American prisoner, the death sentence handed down in his absence never carried out. He returned to civilian life in the region he had once been ordered to defend, and in March 1962, at a reunion of American and German veterans held at the ruins of the crossing itself, he gave the account that opened this story. The same clinical inventory of explosives requested and explosives received, delivered 17 years after the fact to reporters from the Army that had once been trying to kill him. Scheller, Strobel, Kraft, and Peters have no comparable epilogue. Their families received no letters, because the letters were burned. Their graves in the Westerwald were unmarked when they were dug. William Hoge was never disciplined for a decision that broke his own orders. It could not have been punished. It worked. He stayed in uniform for years afterward, decorated rather than reprimanded for a call that historians now generally agree shortened the campaign in the West by weeks. Why is this story not better known? Partly timing. Remagen falls in the middle of a month that also brings the crossing of the Rhine in the north, the final destruction of the Ruhr pocket taking shape behind it, and, within weeks, the discovery of the camps that would come to define how this war is remembered above almost everything else. A single captured bridge, however improbable, struggles to hold public attention against images like those. Partly fiction, a 1969 film borrowed the bridge's name and little else, inventing characters and compressing events until the record and the movie had almost nothing in common, which meant that for most people who ever heard of Remagen at all, what they knew was not what happened. What actually preserved the record was slower and less cinematic. An American Army combat historian, Ken Heckler, reached the units involved within days of the fighting and recorded their accounts while the men could still remember exact minutes and exact orders. On the German side, it was survivors like Bratge, returning decades later to stand at the site with the men who had once shot at him, willing to describe failure without softening it. And on the east bank, the surviving stone tower, the only piece of the original bridge left standing after the central span went into the river, now houses a small peace museum built inside the same basalt walls that once held German machine guns and flak crews. Veterans kept the story alive longer than any institution did. American engineer battalions that fought at Remagen still carry a campaign streamer naming the battle, a strip of ribbon on a flagstaff that most people who see it could not place on a map. German and American survivors kept meeting at the site for decades after Bratge gave his account, a ritual arranged by men who had spent one afternoon in 1945 trying to kill each other and much of the rest of their lives trying to make sure someone remembered why. The rest of the Ludendorff Bridge was never rebuilt. 2 blackened stumps of pier still stand in the current at Remagen, and that is what a visitor to the site finds today. Not a bridge. What is left after a bridge is gone. Willi Bratge asked for 600 kilograms and was handed 300. That gap, half of what was needed, arriving too late and too weak to matter, turned out to be wide enough for an army to cross. Not through anyone's genius, through a shortage nobody could fill in time, and a decision nobody higher up had authorized, made in the space of a few minutes on a ridge above a river neither side expected to matter this much. The facts outlasted the men who made them. That is usually all that does.